No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 88. Please click to subscribe to our brand new independent news source. Turn on the notification bell, then you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Today, David Starkey is Outspoken, Britain's preeminent historian, social commentator, political commentator, royal mind. He's now part of the independent news revolution with his absolutely brilliant YouTube channel, David Starkey Talks. It is required viewing for anyone with a curious mind. But it is my pleasure to coax him over to Outspoken today, where we will tackle the headlines and issues the MSM continue to ignore, treating us as fools. So, coming up today, growing outrage over the revelation the Southport Massacre terror charges were delayed because of the Chris Kaba verdict. When did Keir Starmer know? Is the state trying to silence Tommy Robinson for good after his move to another dangerous prison? Is Nigel Farage wrong to dismiss Tory leader Kemi Badenoch as more of the same? She doesn't believe that. I'll tell you her response. And why has Mr Starkey joined the long list of outspoken characters to no longer show up live on GB News? Then, in the uncancelled after show, I asked Mr Starkey about the biggest royal stories of the day, including this ridiculous suggestion that the reference to empire should be dropped from our honours in the latest woke outrage. And some big news for you too. The uncancelled after show now broadcasts exclusively daily and on demand via my Substacks. You can Google Dan Wootton Outspoken to find it, or visit our usual website, www.outspoken.live. Please subscribe to a monthly paid membership for access to the after show, my exclusive reporting and columns. Most importantly, and you know how important this is, it is a safe space, free of censorship. Your support, just £5 a month, gives you 30 minutes of extra content every single weekday, and it continues to allow me to make this independent daily news show. But now, let's go. And breaking right now, horror revelations that the Southport Ryson charge statement was delayed by Riot fears. So let me show you this exclusive report in the Sunday Times, which read, the announcement of 2 additional charges against the Southport suspect was delayed by up to a fortnight amid growing fears of a fresh wave of public disorder. The hold-up happened as the high-profile Chris Kaba murder case was winding up, and there was a real possibility that firearms police officers across the country could put down their weapons in protest at the prospect of a colleague being convicted. Now, the Sunday Times, and this was very obvious to us, can disclose that the Crown Prosecution Service first sought permission from the Attorney General's office to charge Axel Rudakabana with possession of a biological weapon on October the 15th, 14 days before the charge was eventually announced. While the CPS normally makes decisions to charge suspects independently, there are a small number of serious offences that require consent from the government's 2 law officers, the Attorney General, Keir Starmer's best mate, and the Solicitor General. Sources have suggested to the Sunday Times that the delay was at least partially linked to significant concerns among ministers, the CPS and police that the announcement could spark public disorder. But David Starkey, firstly, such a pleasure to have you on Outspoken. Secondly...
Morning, Dan, yes.
Great to have you. Secondly, this to me now feels like an absolutely despicable establishment cover-up. I mean, there's no way that Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer did not know within days that Ryson was found at the home of Axel Rudakabana, that he had downloaded an Al-Qaeda terror manual. However, we were not told a thing. And then the actual announcement delayed because of not just Chris Kaba, but also this Tommy Robinson protest. What do you make of it?
I think there are really 2 rather separate issues, Dan, which, forgive me, I don't think you've distinguished. The one that is in the Sunday Times is manifestly or more or less ordinary procedure. That is, before charges which involve terrorism in whatever form. And remember, this is a variant. It is using a terrorist manual. It's not actually a charge of terrorism. But before they can be brought, the government law officers have to be consulted. So what you describe and what the Sunday Times described is an immediate thing within the last month or so, okay? With an immediate and relatively small-scale adjustment to deal with the fact that there was the Tommy Robinson March, there was the Chris Kaba affair, there was the risk. I mean, the real fear, and remember the unspoken, wonderful spoonerism, the unspoken fear is bluntly that the police cannot hold the line. That is what is literally being, that is the background to that. That's immediate. The much bigger question is, it seems to me to be astonishing that these two things, that's to say, his use of the manual on the one hand and the manufacturing of the Ryson, was not known months ago, was not known within days of the actual event. And this is the thing which is, indeed, I would have thought, within hours of the event. This is the thing which is scandalous, that there was at that point, when the Southport riots were going on, in other words, there is this deliberate shutting down of information. And Jonathan Hall, who is responsible for the whole area of terrorism, as he were, he is the czar in this area, he himself said, and he is a QC too. Let's get the initials right. He is a KC, a King's Counsel too. He said quite openly that the fundamental problem is the refusal to disclose information. It was also said by the wonderful businessman who, not the emergency police, if you remember the businessman who tore Axel off the children, he said at the time, the riots have a cause and central to it is the withholding of information. And we all know why it's done. It is the fear of the reaction to crimes committed in the name of Islam, in the name of Allah. And we're getting to the point now where there's a kind of, it seems to me there is now a vicious circle, a genuine vicious circle. There is the determination to treat us as though we were all children, as though we couldn't possibly digest the information, and if we do, we will mishandle it. Therefore, we are to be told as little and as late and as indirectly as possible. And it is guaranteed to make things worse. Again, as Jonathan Hall said, what this does, it breeds the perpetuation of the mistrust between the governed and the governors, between the government and the rest of us. It's profoundly dangerous. And above all, with your New Zealand twang, let me remind you, this is absolutely fundamentally un-British. For centuries, the assumption has been that we have a thing called responsible government. We had responsible government long before we had democracy. We've only had democracy for 100 or 150 years in this country. Long, long before then, there is the idea that through Parliament, government answers to the governed. We are suppressing that idea. We're doing as much as we possibly can to remove Parliament itself from the forum. I mean, the most shocking thing is that MPs are not allowed to ask this question. The absolute scandal was when the Speaker connives at it. The Speaker, remember, Lindsay Hoyle. What is Lindsay Hoyle? A minor, over-promoted backbench MP with, intelligence that would not be able to strike a fire out of a match and a matchbox. He is doing what? He is supposed to be the servant of the House. The glory of the office of Speaker, and whatever one thinks of John Bercow, and I did not think much, John Bercow genuinely saw himself as the voice of the House. This man sees himself as the voice of the government and the voice of the Labour Party, and particularly of Keir Starmer. He's a puppet, and he's showing himself to be a puppet, and this is a disgrace.
It's a complete disgrace because, of course, I revealed at first, actually, on Outspoken last week, Richard Tice was leaned on, the deputy leader of Reform UK, very early in the day, as soon as there was a suspicion that he was going to ask a question about the Southport Massacre. Now, my Reform UK sources say that he was going to set the situation up like we just have, but then ask Starmer directly, do you think the public are stupid? Then, of course, Lindsay Hoyle gives the big statement at the start of PMQs, makes it clear that he's not going to accept any sort of reference to it. And as a result, they go to a Plan B question. Now, I guess you could argue, should Reform UK, should Richard Tice have gone ahead with their questioning? But the problem is, and this is again something Reform UK sources have told me, they are new to Parliament and they are nervous about annoying the Speaker so early on. But as Rupert Lowe, one of their MPs, post on X over the weekend, I'll say it again, despite everything else that has happened this week, do not forget Southport. And Richard Tice himself has accused the Crown Prosecution Service of a cover-up. He wrote, CPS now shamefully making and delaying decisions on Southport to cover up their failings on other cases like Kaba. Disgraceful. CPS is not fit for purpose. Bosses must be fired. New leadership urgently required. And why this seems like such a major cover-up.
Can we
Sorry,
just
yes,
pause,
come in,
though?
please.
We mustn't go on. We're moving. Sorry, forgive me doing your job, but we're moving on too quickly. The proper forum for doing this is Parliament.
Yes.
Moreover, can I remind you, you were just talking about reform. Can I remind you that the unfortunately losing candidate in the Tory leadership election, which is not to say that I dismiss Kemi Badenoch, but I was very keen on Robert, precisely because of his clarity on this kind of question. Robert actually asked publicly in a tweet, what did Starmer know? And the key question, when actually did he know it? That is the key thing. So it's not just reform. It's anybody who cares and anybody who is properly regards the accountability of the politician to the people as something that matters and something that is desperately serious. But can we again put all of this into what is the terrible context? And I'm not a believer in conspiracy. You see, this isn't a conspiracy, Dan. You're presenting it as though it's something that's being done backstage. It's not. This is a deliberate change in the way our politics works. It goes right back, not simply to Starmer, it goes back to Blair, it goes back to 1997. Since 1997, there has been a deliberate attempt at removing as much as possible from Parliament, from the scrutiny of MPs, and even from the control of ministers, and increasingly shifting it into the hands of unaccountable bodies, be they lawyers, be they quangos like the CPS, and be they quasi-quango like the CPS, be they expert bodies like COVID, whatever. All of them are designed essentially to withstand and resist public scrutiny. And there's a very good reason for this. We now have a situation in which we're a bit like the old Soviet Union. That is to say, there is a governing elite. In the case of the Soviet Union, it was called the nomenklatura, which is the whole apparatus of state. It's the bureaucracy, it's the universities, it's the state-run companies, and so on. And you've got the Communist Party, which acts as its political front. Well, in Britain now, I'm afraid, you have exactly the same thing. You've got the universities, you've got the bureaucracy, you've got the quangos and whatever, and the legal profession, and they all have a single political voice, and it's called the Labour Party. And they all have a highly specific set of values. It is globalist. They are believers in diversity, equality, and inclusion. They are believers in critical race theory. They are believers in transgenderism and whatever. They're all on one side. And the rest of us, and particularly those of us who actually exist in the real world where if we don't do something, we don't just say, oh, I don't feel like working on Friday. Oh, the thought that I've got to go into the office, I shall go on strike like the civil servant. Why you can't? I mean, I'm in the middle of a property transaction. You receive a note that we may be able to deal with this in 18 months time. But this world, the real world of the private sector, which of course is now burdened with these vast additional taxation requirements to finance the nomenclatura, the privilege lot, we've a different set of values. We do not believe, generally speaking, in global warming. We do not believe in diversity, equality, and inclusion. We do not believe in critical race theory. So it's a kind of helot class. It's very similar to the world of 1984, as well as to the world of the ex-Soviet Union. And eventually it will break. It will break. How it will break, I desperately hope we will do it peacefully. I desperately hope that we will do it by what I call a restoration, a going backwards. But equally, it is possible that those fears, the fears of the government and the DPP and everything else, that there will be violence. It is entirely possible that it's true that terrible prophecy will be fulfilled. And the thing that terrifies me, Dan, most of all, is all of this is not something that's just going on in conversations between you and me. It's not something that's just going on in questions or non-questions or suppressed questions in the House of Commons. It's going to the streets. This is what is terrible. We have, I say we in this country, we have for 100 and odd years avoided the politics of public confrontation. Even during the Depression, things like the hunger marches and whatever were extraordinarily restrained. There was only that moment, and needless to say, from the left, of the violence of the miners' union in the 1970s, at the late 1970s and the 1980s. That was the only point at which our politics descended into street violence. I'm not talking now of the grotesque criminality of the IRA, best friends, of course, with Palestine and Libya and everything else. But you have to go back way into the 19th century to find a politics that takes to the street. And this is terrifying. Of course, there are other countries where that's usual, countries that have got a revolutionary experience, like France. That's why there are the demonstrations all the time. And of course, in the background of everybody's mind, there is Weimar, there is Germany of the 20s and the 30s. And we all know where that ended.
Indeed. So look, there's lots for me to ask you about there. So can we come first to the Southport so-called rioters? Now, I always put rioters in inverted commas when I'm speaking about them, David, because I actually don't believe a vast majority of the people who have ended up political prisoners behind bars, for example, Peter Lynch, who actually ended up dead behind bars, he was not part of any violence. He yelled some pretty nasty comments to a police officer. He was not violent. I've looked at the footage. That was very clear. So that's the first thing. I don't call a lot of these people rioters, and I don't call a lot of what went on riots. But before we knew, or before we had confirmation of this new information about Axel Rudigbana having downloaded an Al-Qaeda training manual, having been producing Ryson, you said that the Southport rioters were right anyway. I guess... Can you clarify what you meant?
What I was saying was that not that the rioters were right. I've just been saying now very specifically and clearly, I do not want street violence. I do not like street politics. Street politics, whether they're the Palestinians or whether they're us getting excited about Rotherham or Southport or whatever, they are deeply dangerous. As we saw, they get out of hand. Just to analyze your own words, Dan. Even if you begin with good intentions, when you get lined up and the temperature goes up and placards start moving and the police start pushing, the whole thing is, it's a tinderbox. It is likely to explode. The issue that is important is a different one. Let's admit that they were riots. They were riots. It's much simpler if we call things by their proper names. Let's go back, however. Let's go back a little more than about 14 years. Let's go back to 2011. Let's go back to the riots that took place in London on a vastly, vastly greater scale with spectacular violence. Let's go back a little less far to all the demonstrations that followed George Floyd, the whole lunacy of Black Lives Matter in London in 2020. Why do I say lunacy in that particular one? By the way, the reason that the riots happened in 2011 was, again, it was the very similar circumstances to Kaba. It was the police shooting of a black man who turned out to be a violent criminal, and so on. And what did it lead to? It led to astonishing scenes in which entire it's like America, entire sections of Croydon were deliberately burned down. But if we go back to 2020 to BLM, what did we see then? The demonstrations in London, remember, allowed during COVID lockdown were not peaceful. There were scenes of huge confrontation. The statue of Churchill had to be boarded up to protect it from being further damaged after it had been daubed. I'm certain if it hadn't been boarded up, it would have actually been torn down. And what did we see? We saw Sir Keir Starmer, this ex-director of public prosecutions, and Angela Rayner, this stalwart of the people. What did we see them doing? We saw the preposterous spectacle of them going down on their knees in an empty office, prostrating themselves directly before the rioters. And can we again be quite clear? How many police deaths are there by shooting in Britain every year? It is 2. On average, it is 2. We have a police force which is unique in the world in not generally using firearms. The idea that this is some sort of endemic problem, which the black boys are regularly shot by the police, is demented. Black boys are not so much regularly shot, but regularly stabbed. But they're regularly stabbed by other black boys, unfortunately, as we all know. It is a deep mark of shame. In other words, Black Lives Matter is only interested in black lives when they could be turned into a token of racism. It doesn't care less. If a black life is taken by a black man, it couldn't give a damn. It only cares if it's taken by somebody who is actually white or honorary white. That is to say, they are a member of a police force. So, but in other words, this was an entirely artificial set of events, as I pointed out at the time, which is why I was cancelled. And the arguments about it, the events itself, were wholly artificial. What does Starmer do as well as taking the knee? He doesn't just prostrate himself physically, he prostrates himself mentally before the rioters, and he says, we must understand the causes. What did all the left do in 2011, despite the gigantic scale of the violence? Oh, we must understand the causes, but we mustn't try to understand the causes if the rioters are white, must we? Instead, what did Starmer do earlier this year? He immediately, and by the way, it seems to me, he committed direct contempt of court. Before the rioters were even tried, he declared what their motives were. He said they were far-right thugs. So all this elaborate notion that we've seen in the House of Commons, that, oh, we mustn't ask about terrorism because it may prejudice poor Axel's trial, is a total eyewash. It is a lie. It is a two-tier standard. It transgresses every notion that we have had of equality before the law. And the problem is, Dan, and I don't think you're actually pushing this hard enough with all these flavors of conspiracy. It's not something that's being done. It's not something that's being done by concealment. It's something that is now absolutely flagrant.
Yeah, it's a cover-up in plain sight.
No, it's worse than that.
Well, how would you frame it?
I'll now frame it. It's now deliberately built into our legal system. This is the thing that is so utterly, infinitely shocking. We now have thanks to the Human Rights Act and the Equality Act. We have a system of law which is deliberately designed to protect minorities against the majority. This is absolutely clear. We know this from the work of the late Lord Bingham, who is the man who invents this bizarre notion of the rule of law. He specifically says that the Human Rights Act is deliberately anti-democratic. He actually, I'm quoting directly. He says it is anti-democratic because it demands protection for unpopular minorities, be it blacks, gypsies, Islam, Muslims, whatever. And it, of course, got worse since he actually wrote those words, because later on you pass the Equality Act, which actually entrenches this further into law. So you have the law itself biased against the majority. And the thing that makes it even worse, if we go back, let's go back to Southport. Let's actually look at the verdict of, not the verdict, the statements from the various judges who were trying these people. Remember, they all made the terrible mistake of pleading guilty, something you do not do. Everybody should be a member of the Free Speech Union, and
Amen.
everybody in the circumstances that they're actually arraigned with something like this must refuse the services of a police solicitor. You must get in touch with the Free Speech Union, and you will be supplied with excellent legal advice. I know, I've been through it, right? But what the judges, all the judges did, every single one of them, in what seems to me to be the most flagrant display of judicial bias, every one of the judges invoked the phrases of the multicultural society, that diversity is our strength. In other words, that you've now got a law which is biased to minorities, and the judges, because they are part of this same elite, this same neo-communist nomenclatura, they are bought into this system of values. So it's a double lock. It's the law interlocking with an elite system of values which none of the rest of us share.
And obviously, the most egregious cases of that, in my opinion, were Lucy Connelly, the wife of a Conservative councillor who made what has been described as an incitement to violence on X, the platform X, and Julie Sweeney, the grandmother who posted in frustration on Facebook to a very small group of people following the Southport riots, all end up with prison sentences of over 2 years. So free speech is dead, isn't it, in this country?
No, you have to be careful about it. What you must not do is appear to offer any incitement to violence. They all marginally cross the line. But remember, they cross the line much less sharply, for example, than the Labour councillor who was screaming, fascists cut their throats. In other words, as we see, there is a complete, and he, of course, did not plead guilty. He, of course, has been released on bail. He, of course, has had his trial postponed as long as possible. So we can see, again, a two-tier thing in operation, but one has to become wise. Remember, Jesus, who is pretty shrewd politically. I've always said I think his theology is rubbish, but gosh, is he shrewd politically? We've got to be as wise as serpents, he says. As well as meek as lambs, we've to be as wise as serpents. We all need to start wising up. You and I have been through it. We've survived for various reasons. And we know the rules. And we've got to make sure more and more people know the rules, because it was understanding that enabled people to resist in the Soviet Union and to build up that slow groundswell, which ate the system out from within. Everybody now knows what's going on. Only a fool doesn't know. You know it's rotten. You know it's corrupt. But you know what? They're also stupid. I mean, one of the things that's really important to understand is, again, as with the Soviet Union. Yes, there were tiny centers of intelligence. There was the KGB, the secret police, people like Putin, who actually had a brain. But overwhelmingly, the system is stupid. The system is simply thick. Starmer himself is thick. And you can see it when he gets 2 Bs and a C at A level at a highly selective school. His 2 Bs are in music and mathematics. They're subjects which anybody who can do them does without even getting up in the morning and going into the exam room. You can just do them. So they're basically thick. And what one's got to understand then is we've got to be clever. One's got to tease these rules. One's got to mock. This is one of the reasons, actually, that I'm very much looking forward to seeing Kemi Badenoch confronting Starmer in the House of Commons. I have mixed feelings about her.
No, and I do want to talk in more detail about the Tory leadership contest, but can I just pick you up on something first?
Okay, no, but I'm just saying she's a rule. Let me just quickly make that point first, and then we don't forget it. She's a rule breaker. And she's somebody who's got a sense of humor. She's got a sense of wit. What is striking about our new masters, they're all, without a single exception, there is nobody who has got the faintest capacity to make a joke. Mockery is central. Of course, one of the problems, Dan, is that nearly the whole of the so-called alternative comedians are absolutely on the side of the left, which is why they're so stupid that they actually think that, putting Thatcher and the F word into a sentence is wonderfully funny, or whatever Janie Goodley or whatever she was called, putting Trump and the C word into a sentence is apparently miraculously funny. And it isn't, of course. It's silly and it's childish. And I will speak ill of the dead in as far as she's concerned. But we've all got to play this game of being clever, of going round, of hollowing the thing out from the inside.
No, I get that, but I just wanted to pick you up on something though. You used the word corrupt. So in your view, what is corrupt? Are you talking about the government? Are you talking about the judiciary? Are you talking about their relationship with the mainstream media, which has decided to not ask Starmer or Yvette Cooper a single question about what they knew when? What is specifically corrupt?
Corrupt is a word that has many different meanings, which is why you are quite rightly trying to tease them out. Clearly, this is a government which is corrupt in the most fundamental sense of the word. That is to say, it has received gifts and favors. The astonishing performance of the kind of it's like wandering through Selfridges and picking out the nicest items. The performance that we've actually seen with the Labour Party and Lord Ali. And by the way, in the days when Private Eye was funny and before Ian Hislop became part of the left-wing establishment, Ali had a wonderful nickname in Private Eye. He's called Wahid, and he was always known as Lord Wahid Boy, as Lord Wide Boy, and he's a wide boy. He's actually a very nice man. Once upon a time he tried to invest in me, and then his team decided that it was absolutely impossible to make any money out of me, which is absolutely fine. So he does throw his favors pretty widely, but they, of course, were caught out because they had been so utterly, infinitely hypocritical. Every single time the Tories had stepped even faintly out of line, immediately Starmer with his po face comes in. Now, the point with Starmer is, of course, everybody thought when Starmer did that what he was a kind of upright morals. Starmer, in my view, has got no morality whatever. Starmer is a man without any serious moral value. Let's get this right. His entire career is a lie. He lied to the Labour Party, he lied to his MPs, he lied to the nation, and he continues to lie. He finds it difficult opening his mouth without uttering a lie. That simply seems to me now to be absolutely demonstrated to be the case. Starmer, on the other hand, wouldn't see it like that, because Starmer is a lawyer. And let me tell you what lawyers are. Lawyers are the small print at the end of a mobile phone contract. You know, the bit that you never read. They're the sort of people who read all of that. And what Starmer does, Starmer says, do you remember, I obeyed the rules, because he claimed, and in fact it even turned out to be untrue in this case, that he had declared this stuff, therefore it was all right. And rather than producing a moral response to it, when finally the pressures get overwhelming, he did this extraordinary thing. This is the Prime Minister, a man who really does have quite a lot to do, and especially when they're rather slow, as I suspect he is, it's probably really quite hard work, which is why often he looks so very drained and tired. What did he do? He went back through those receipts and he calculated how much he could say, now we've changed the rules. We changed the rules on this day. Therefore, everything that I received after that, I will repay. And he, with little calculator there, and he came up that £6,000 out of the tens and tens of thousands had to be repaid. And you know what? He thought that actually wiped the slate clean. Do you see what I mean, Dan?
Yes.
There is something really very, very peculiar about this man. So what they think they're doing is following a set of rules, and if they do, it is okay. The big point that I'm making is the rules have been changed to exclude you, me, and everybody else. That is what is so terrible. That the structures that we have had for centuries of fairly open, not absolutely, no, with official secret sites and everything else, but of essentially open government, and above all, of a place where, as it were, things that you really didn't want to be exposed could be exposed. That's what parliamentary privilege is about. What the privilege that was denied by the Speaker. That is the moment at which MPs are protected, or should be protected, against all the normal applications of law. That is to say, that is the moment at which you cut through. And it is again the reason is Parliament used to be, before Blair, before the Supreme Court, Parliament used to be the High Court. It used to be the final point at which everybody, however powerful they were, could be held to account. This has been deliberately destroyed as much as possible. The only chance, in other words, all the things you're talking about are true, but they're the fragments.
Mm-hmm.
What we need to do, we need to see the big picture. We need to understand what has actually happened, so we're equipped to reverse it, and preferably to reverse it peacefully. If not, I fear by other means. Otherwise, we really are lost.
Elon Musk predicts a civil war. Is that hyperbolic?
Well, what I'm trying to say is, it is when tensions build up between the minority and the majority, and particularly when you have a country which has very, very few military resources. Remember, what is peculiar again about Britain, we do not have an armed police force. And the reason we don't, it goes back to the wonderful Sir Robert Peel in the 1830s. There was an immense resistance to the creation of the police force, because in those days the English did genuinely believe in freedom and liberty, and there was a fear that having a police force was a kind of army of occupation. So you take the deliberate decision that the police were not to look military. And one of the things that's very alarming about especially the Metropolitan Police in recent years is they started to try to look a bit military. That it was the reason that the police were given their rather silly helmet. It was designed to look as least like any kind of military cap as it could possibly be. It was why they were not armed. In continental Europe, as we see, all police are armed as a matter of course. In America, all police are armed as a matter of course. Here we have this idea of policing by consent. But of course, that means you have a politics of consent. What has happened since 1997 is that idea of consent, of democratic consent, has been deliberately devalued down. And again, you see, all shows like this seem to me to be they're nibbling at the edges of it. There is actually a big central question. We should all be asking ourselves, for example, why you and me would not be allowed into polite company, and the elegant figures in the House of Lords would, be like Cardinal Wolsey with a scented orange held in front of their noses against the infection of what? These awful people called populists.
Yeah.
Why have we got this funny new word called populism?
The snake oil of populism, Starmer referred to it after Southport.
Yes. What? So what was it again? I didn't catch it.
The snake oil of populism, he kept repeating.
Right. Okay. Yeah. You can sense the orange, can't you? You can sense the Cardinal Wolsey tweak of the nostrils. Right. Why have we had to invent this word called populism? It means just of the people.
Well, I'm proud to be a populist.
It's the Latin rather than the Greek. It's from the Latin populus rather than from the Greek demos. Why we had to invent it? Because you know what, Daniel, at one time, democracy meant of the people. Democracy smelt of the common folk. Democracy was the kind of thing that you held up an orange to your nose about. What's happened is people like Bingham, people like Starmer, who remember is a human rights lawyer too, they've redefined democracy. Democracy is no longer about majority rule. Democracy is about the protection of the rights of minorities and this thing called the rule of the rule of law. And what it means, of course, is the rule of lawyers. And it is now actually hard baked into our politics. The Supreme Court essentially regards itself as being above Parliament. That's exactly what happened when the Miller case, when the legality of Parliament's the prorogation of Parliament by Boris Johnson took place. This is absolutely shocking. Remember, people talk about the separation of powers. In other words, what they really mean is the government shouldn't intervene in the judiciary, right? I would put it the other way around as well. The judiciary shouldn't intervene in government. And the last time we had a violent breakdown of our politics in 1689, the Glorious Revolution, one of the things that happened was that careful demarcation between politics and the law. Because do you know what James II, the man who's driven from the throne, had been doing? He'd been using the law to enforce his own policies against Parliament and against the law of the land. And he'd been using what? He'd been using a compliant judge, Judge Jeffreys, to do it. And I'm afraid what happened after 1689 was that Judge Jeffreys was executed. I think our judiciary really do need to think about what they're doing. I am not calling for it. I am pointing out what happens if the law trespasses into politics. Because we now have, again, can we all understand this? Lawyers now, judges, what do? Judges now, bizarrely, decide our actual extractive fuel policy, our extractive industries policy. Judges decide whether we can frack or not, or whether we can extract oil or not. This is demented. Yeah. Judges now decide labour rates. And this is why we're bankrupting Birmingham and why we are about to bankrupt next. In other words, what's happened is there's been a huge, grotesque overreach within our politics. Everybody needs to understand this. People need to inform themselves about it, and they need to vote accordingly.
Tommy Robinson, where do you stand on him? Is he a political prisoner? Should he be behind bars in a prison at the moment with a large Muslim population, 37% Muslim population in Woodhill? And is it wrong that the mainstream media talks about this guy as if he's either a devil or ignores him altogether?
I'm going to have to plead to a lot. And sorry, you know me, I'm not somebody who hesitates normally. I don't know very much about Tommy Robinson. Robinson belongs into a world which I don't really understand, and I don't really want to understand. As I said, this is the politics of the street. And I am deeply, deeply uncomfortable with that. I'm infinitely more uncomfortable, by the way, with the politics of the street as we see it every Sunday, with those abominations of Jew-hating processions in favor of the radical Islam that murders and slaughters and rapes. That I object to even more. But I really, I don't understand Robinson, and in one sense, I don't want to understand Robinson because I don't want that sort of politics. Right, that's my general position. Let me turn it the other way around. On the other hand, if you have a politics, as I've been describing it, in which you suppress democracy, in which you go for a platonic noble lie, in other words, you proclaim a set of values which actually most of the population doesn't subscribe to, then I'm afraid you get Tommy Robinsons.
Yes.
That's my position.
The Tory leadership.
I suppose if I'm going to pursue that argument further, if the government, if Starmer's government and this entire legal, political, administrative complex that we have continues holding the kind of line that it is, if it continues using financial and fiscal policies, as we saw in the last government, to protect its own, to protect the public sector at the expense of everybody else, which is that's the only thing that budget is designed to do. It's designed to featherbed the public sector. As we know, Starmer himself, and does everybody know this? Starmer himself has a pension so huge as Director of Public Prosecutions that there is a separate Act of Parliament to protect it. Everybody just take a deep breath and think about that. You can actually look it up. There is a separate Act of Parliament. So the problem is, let's just follow through what I've been saying now and conclude it. There is inevitably, if you have that sort of two-tier, not simply two-tier politics, but two-tier taxation, two-tier everything else, there will be more and more Tommy Robinsons. And finally, the respectable political establishment will have to deal with them. You can see it is the great tension. I mean, let's be quite clear. This is the tension, not simply with the press. It's the tension with reform. Reform and its leading MPs and people like Farage are visibly pulling back. They too are frightened. They too are dealing with unknowns. They too know that they're staring into the abyss. This is. Or remember, Robinson himself, right, let's again get this clear. Yeah. Robinson himself will lead nowhere.
And he doesn't want to, really. He doesn't want
and I
a
do just Robinson himself will go nowhere. But if we continue down the route that we are now, what will happen is exactly what happened in ancient Rome, is exactly what happened in Weimar Germany. You will find some element of the formal political system working out a way overtly to enlist this. And I'm sorry, we've now already seen it in another very important respect. We've seen it with the new Islamist party that is rising up like some evil mushroom. We've now, I think it's 5 alleged independents who are in fact members of an Islamist party. And they are, of course, supported by this huge street mafia that consists on the one hand of Muslims, who, by the way, unfortunately, seems to me, terribly keen on going to the gym. And secondly, they are supported by the insane fools of the radical left, the Hope Not Hate lot, the Antifa lot. And they do look like a street army, and they have increasingly political representation. I mean, this is why I am so terrified.
No, and there's a reason to be terrified, but I want to dig down a little bit deeper, if it's okay, into the Reform UK question, specifically in regards to what we saw over the weekend, the election of Kemi Badenoch. as Conservative Party leader. So Rupert Lowe, who's one of the brilliant Reform UK MPs, he posted on X, Badenoch wins. I have never been more confident that Reform will outright win the next general election. And Nigel Farage had a similar take. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
As projected, and indeed delivered, Kemi Badenoch is the leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition, which means the Conservative Party have turned their backs on the idea of leaving the ECHR because that's what Generic stood for. What you're going to get with Kemi Badenoch is more of the same. Pretty much exactly the same as the last 14 years. I've got to tell you, one thing they don't understand, it isn't about the individuals, the Conservative brand is broken.
And then he released, David, a second video being even more specific about what Generic's loss meant.
The Tories have chosen. They've chosen Kemi Badenoch over Robert Generic. What that means is the Conservative Party is now committed to staying in the ECHR, which means we can't deport foreign criminals and they will never, ever stop the votes. So if you voted Generic or wanted Generic to win, you now realise the direction of the Conservative Party. It is now time to join Reform. Do it.
And Kemi Badenoch, in her first interview, which she gave to the BBC, this is how she responded to the Reform UK threat.
Nigel Farage says that you are more of the same, no change.
Well, I think that's actually quite a hilarious comment.
Hilarious, why?
Yeah, yes, it is, because I'm obviously not more of the same. And I think that shows that he doesn't actually know what to say in response to either me or some of the principles which I have set out. Nigel Farage and the success of Reform are a symptom of the Conservative Party, in my view, not being clear enough and consistent enough about our values and about how we were using those Conservative values to deliver for the British people. If we get this right, then I think people will start to see that Reform is nothing but a spoiler for the Conservatives and just creates more and more Labour government.
Your reaction, David Starkey, who's right, Farage or Badenoch?
I voted very clearly for Robert Generic. I thought, again, I would say this, wouldn't I, in view of everything that I've been saying, that he didn't go remotely far enough. What I want to see repealed is not simply the ECHR. I want the Equality Act repealed. I want the independence of the Bank of England repealed. I want the Climate Change Committee repealed. I want English nature repealed. I want us to go back to a system where the people that you and I elect in Parliament actually control something. And until we get rid of that lot, we will get nowhere. And above all, I want the Supreme Court to be cut down to size again and to be made a subcommittee of Parliament, because otherwise we have, and this is what is so terrifying, as I tried to explain when we were talking earlier in the show, we actually have a system in which the law now rules over politics, which means lawyers like Starmer actually control the political process by legal means. This, in other words, there's this kind of, it's the equivalent of a kind of constitutional Iron Dome. It's like the Israeli Iron Dome of law that protects this entirely, in my view, illegitimate and alien system. Right. So that's what I want to see happen. I would have much preferred, for all of those reasons, to have seen Robert elected.
Me too.
On the other hand, I am a great believer that you do not destroy things. And the problem with reform is presenting itself in a fashion which is just as destructive, unfortunately, as the Labour Party was in the 1990s and as the Labour Party is turning out to be now. The reason I am a Conservative is because I believe, isn't it odd? Isn't it funny? I believe in conserving things. I believe that it is reckless and foolish change which has got us into the mess that we are now. It was reckless and foolish change which set up the NHS, this ludicrous centralized system when we already had a highly functioning system of localized and charity-driven healthcare, just like continental Europe, that could have been the basis for an insurance system, just like continental Europe. But we chose to pull it all down. It's because we believed in the new that we did the utterly disastrous thing after the Second World War, and we tore down what was left of our cities, and we built the hideous left-wing brutalist rubbish, which means nobody wants to live in the thing. Why our cities don't work is because they are vile and they are ugly. Look at what's going on in continental Europe now. Go and look in Poland. Poland is the fastest growing economy in Europe. And do you know what it did at the end of the Second World War? Despite its desperate poverty, despite communism, it rebuilt. It recreated that sense of historical continuity. And it's when you rip that away, it's when you rip that sense of belonging, that sense of rootedness, that sense of cultural security away, that you get the horrors that we are experiencing now. Now, why I'm so sympathetic to Badenoch is that she gets half of that. She understands the point, and she expresses it very clearly and forcefully, and unlike most politicians, especially English ones, in very clear English, she expresses that sense of the need for cultural continuity. She expresses an understanding of that, I would argue, better and more fluently than Jenrick did. But that can only happen if the big political decisions are taken. And she is setting up now what? She's setting up at least two, as it were, inquiries. She's deliberately modelling what's to be done with the Conservative Party on what Margaret Thatcher did after 1975. That's to say, you've got an instinct about the direction in which you want to go. You've got a guru. I've no idea who hers is. In those days, it was Sir Keith Joseph. And then you come up with a series of serious policy proposals, which were unveiled to the country in 1979 in that astonishing Tory manifesto, and swept the board for Margaret Thatcher. So for me, Dan, it's very simple. I want to see what she comes up with in those policy proposals. If they do the sort of thing that I am talking about, the future of the Conservative Party is safe. If they don't, do you know what? I might even become a member of Reform.
I voted for Reform at the general
I mean, I have
election.
no look. I get on extremely well with Nigel Farage. I actually had one of the more amusing events. It may even form a footnote in politics. This is back in March when I was in Palm Beach, and if you remember, I was lecturing on Tudor art in Palm, and I was actually lecturing on the Tudors and the wonderful refurbishment that we were doing of Hever Castle. Anyway, I have lots of friends, 9% on the Republican side of politics in America, and it happened that Nigel was in Palm Beach as well to have one of his interviews with the Donald, and Nigel and I met for tea immediately after his interview with the Donald. Tea in my case was Earl Grey. Tea in Nigel's case was 3 quintuple gins and tonic down like that, and the sight of him wearing pink golfing shorts, because terrible sight, because we were meeting at the golf club. By the way, there are two. There's a golf club where people play, which is really awful, and there's a golf club where nobody plays, which is really, really rather smart. We were there, and I told him at that point that it was his duty. He was then very hesitant about standing, if you remember. He was correctly saying he has major family burdens in terms of finance. He was saying for the first time in his life, he's making serious money at Talk Radio, and he was very doubtful about whether he should stand. I told him, and I'm perfectly prepared to say this, I told him he should stand. It was necessary that the Conservative Party, the kind of party that called itself the Conservative Party, was defeated. And it needed to be defeated shatteringly. And the kind of complicity of so-called conservatives like David Cameron, George Osborne, Michael Gove in the catastrophe of New Labour is something that will have to be excised. It will have to be recognised as a terrible, terrible mistake. Otherwise, Farage will be right. So I mean, I've no problem whatever. I've attended reform events. I've spoken at them. We are a broken family. And there will have to be a bond, a new bond of union. The issue is, it would be much better if Nigel could act in this case as Nigel acted over Brexit. If you remember, over Brexit, Nigel acted effectively as an Archimedean lever on English politics, which is why he's, whatever happens now, he is the most influential figure in 21st century British politics. If it had not been for Nigel, we would still be in the EU. I think I'm certain he will, one way or another, perform exactly that same operation, that Archimedean, the fulcrum and the lever that can shift universes. He will perform exactly that same task in breaking the Conservative Party away from what it's been. Again, it's all this conspiracist language when people talk about the Uni Party. Now, normally, me, respectable historian, go, ha, 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 ha. But actually, it's true. It really is true. There was effectively no break of government in 2010 at all. And in other words, when Labour goes on about the disastrous state of the country, they're absolutely right. But that's because there was no break in 2010. We continued down that disastrous route. And Nigel, one way or another, will be the person who breaks it. What I do not think, Dan, and this is the important thing, he is not a prime minister. He is so infinitely divisive that there is no way that he could actually be a national leader. Or if he were, it would be in the situation that we find ourselves with Keir Starmer. He would dwell equally on an extreme. And that is profoundly dangerous.
I want to ask you about Kemi Badenoch and the reaction from some parts of the hard left, specifically this horrendous Labour MP, Dawn Butler, who shared a post saying that Kemi is the blackface of white supremacy. This post read, "Today, the most prominent member of white supremacy's black collaborator class in Britain is likely to be made leader of the Conservative Party. Here are some handy tips for surviving the immediate surge of Badenochism, i.e. white supremacy and blackface. Don't allow yourself to be gaslit. Of course, a victory for Badenoch is an obvious, unprecedented, and once inconceivable victory for racism." And then we saw that expressed even further by another, I believe, very nefarious force in this country, Dr. Shola. Have a watch of this, David.
Even though she looks African on the outside, they put whiteness inside her. That's right, that's right. That is not racism. No, that is blackface. That is the new kind of blackface. That's right. The only way is up for Kemi. She understands how the system works. Kemi is going for Prime Minister, so please get out of her way. If you're black British looking for reparation, go and repair yourself, or Kemi is not the one for you. If you're black British fighting systemic injustice, Kemi is not the one for you. Get out of her way.
David, your reaction?
Yes, it's horrific, isn't it? And it's licensed. It is licensed by our current political system. It is a grotesque appeal to race-based politics. It is saying, if you are black, this is what you must think. Can you imagine? We've now got ourselves into the position where the radical left is so wed to this idea of identity that it thinks that the amount of melanin in your skin determines what goes on in your brain.
But isn't it depressing, though?
Can we just pause and let that sink in? That is purely everything. Well, they are very fond of attacking people as fascists. That is pure fascism. That is a uniform and single legal system. All of that we are throwing away. And we are throwing it away from the left. This is what is extraordinary. The left used to believe, the great banner of the left was the belief in universal man and universal human equality. This has been completely replaced with a race and religiously based politics. And it is appalling. But organizations, that's it. But they have a license to do this.
Indeed.
The legal system has been so completely perverted. And so when I talk about two-tier, I'm not talking about it in the ordinary fashion. I'm not saying, okay, we've got a bit of bias in the sentences. The system itself is deliberately biased against the majority.
Indeed. David, stay there just for 1 minute because I want to talk to you about GB News. But first, this episode is brought to you by Manscaped, the global leader in men's lifestyle and grooming. Every man knows the unbeatable feeling of a fresh barbershop shave. Now, what if I told you that you no longer have to wait weeks or even months between appointments to experience it? I'm introducing Manscaped's latest release, the Chairman Pro package. The all-in-one set includes everything you need to recreate the luxury of a professional shave right at home. Whether you're after that daily silky smooth finish or prefer to maintain a rugged 5 o'clock shadow, the Chairman Pro package has you covered. First up, we have the star of the show, the electric foil shaver. This isn't just any shaver. It comes with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads. You have the 4-blade foil for that close, smooth shave when you're looking to go absolutely clean. And you have the skin-safe stubble trimmer for when you want to keep a bit of a rugged look. Both heads are designed with skin-safe technology to help reduce razor burn and irritation so your skin feels smooth and comfortable after every shave, reducing redness or discomfort. A standout feature that truly differentiates the Chairman Pro from the rest is Flex Adjust technology. This innovative tech ensures a superior shave by allowing both blades and the pivoting head to seamlessly adapt to the unique contours of your face and is gentle on the neck area, helping you maintain great contact with your skin at every angle. And the Chairman Pro is waterproof, so you can use it right in the shower. It simplifies the cleanup too, just a quick rinse under the sink and you're all set. It isn't just for daily shaves either. It is powerful enough to tackle up to 5-day growth, making it perfect whether you're shaving every day or just tidying up after a few days. With up to 75 minutes of runtime on a single charge, you won't have to worry about running out of juice mid-shave. It also comes with a travel lock to help keep it from accidentally powering on during travel. But that's not all. The package also includes the Power Shave Gel to get the ultimate wet shave experience. It's packed with skin-soothing ingredients that defend against redness and irritation. And to finish off, we've got the Face Shave Soother, and aftershave serum is a game changer. So you can get the Chairman Pro package today and experience a shave that is as smooth as you deserve. Head over to manscaped.com and join the over 11 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by using the code OUTSPOKEN for 20% off and free shipping. That's www.manscaped.com using the code OUTSPOKEN. Stay on top of your grooming game and be ready for anything the season throws your way. David Starkey, GB News, what is going on? Because obviously I was cancelled from there, and then over the past few months, I still speak to a lot of people within that organisation. David, I have a lot of respect for a lot of the people there. But I was told that you are now no longer allowed to appear on the channel live. They don't trust you to broadcast live. Is that true?
I haven't the faintest idea. Nobody bothered to tell me. I mean, look, they're a commercial channel. Mm-hmm. Or they should be. Actually, they're not, of course. There are a couple of rich men's toys. But they take commercial decisions. If they've decided they don't want me, that's absolutely fine. They have no idea how they treated you. They allowed my contract to run its course. They paid everything they owed me. I have got absolutely nothing to say. They're entitled to make a judgment. It's as simple as
Were you
that.
disappointed?
Do you know what? I couldn't greatly care, Dan. I've survived because I make my own rules. I don't believe I obey the law of the land, and I respect the law of the land, even when, as I tried to point out, the law of the land is based on principles that have gone seriously awry. But I survived cancellation because I simply refused to be cancelled. As you pointed out at the beginning of this show, the title, Uncancelled, as you pointed out at the beginning of this show, there is an entirely new media landscape in which we're in a sense, we've gone back, if you like, to the rule of the jungle. We're in a sort of state of nature, the old territories of the old media, and in that respect, GB News is really a sort of little chip off the old media block. You know, it's under Ofcom. It's part of that universe. And we do our own things, and we reach out in our own ways. Again, it is the remarkable thing about Elon Musk. He is the one who understands this most clearly, that there's a degree of unfilteredness in this new world. Now, there's much that's unpleasant about it, especially I noticed on Twitter, by far the nastiest voices are from the left. The ones who promote violence, the ones who use horrible language, the ones who are entirely incapable of having an argument and will resort to some vile personal remark, but that's fine. That's what Musk talks about as the free market of ideas. And that's the world that we are in. GB News has apparently taken the decision. I've no idea how terribly loose-tongued I was. Any remark that I might have made pales into absolute insignificance compared with what we've just heard now.
Who is, by the way, those people, the likes of Dr. Scholar, the likes of Dawn Butler, they are constantly on the mainstream media, constantly on Woke ITV, constantly on the British Bashing Corporation.
They are constantly purveying that vile, destructive, divisive talk, and they're allowed to do it. And we are fools. Now, I'm not saying they should be banned, but what I'm saying is there should be effective and forceful voices calling them out and countering them. And of course, the reason they get away with this is that most of us on our side of the argument are fighting, if we're fighting at all, with half a gag on and one hand tied behind our backs. And it really is the nonsense again, which is pervade on arguments over reparations with slavery. And the arguments, as it were, on that side are rubbish. They are appalling. They're based on deliberate perversion of history, absolute failure to comprehend contemporary experience then. For example, looking at how a French colony would have been treated. I'm an enormous believer, for example, with the West Indies, of saying, do you really think being British was such a terrible thing? Why not go and have a look at the French West Indies colony, which we now call Haiti? Go and have a look there. Go and look what Haiti looks like. Realize that the poor Haitians actually had to buy their freedom from France. But who is prepared to say that? Who is prepared to put those arguments? Who is allowed to put them? And it is, again, this desperately dangerous skewing of the scales. The thing that's terrible, isn't it, Dan? You look at the Old Bailey, you look at the Central Criminal Court, there's that famous statue of justice with the scales. You now know that the scales are weighted, and you know that the hand of justice rests on them, deliberately perverting them and deliberately opening the way to people like Dr. Shona and the rest of the horrors. And frankly, she's profoundly dangerous. She's not half as dangerous as the Islamist left.
No, indeed. But with GB News, I guess everything.
I'm sorry. Can I just say
yes
that I have nothing further to add. Because I am a deep believer in the right of judgment of commercial organizations. That
Yes.
nobody, I have no right to be published by anybody. I have no right for any broadcaster to employ me. And if they choose to arrive at that judgment, that's fine.
No,
Equally,
and I understand that, but what I was going to ask about, though, was about the force, because it's everything that you've been talking about what happened after 1997 is represented by Ofcom, or the Ofcommunists, as I call it, because effectively what has happened is that the Ofcommunists have threatened to take GB News off air. They've fined them £100,000. So this is, again, how the establishment works to shut down voices, isn't it?
yes, of course it is. I mean, equally, I mean, Ofcom has behaved more gently than many people wanted. I mean, if you remember, the respectable, what is so astonishing, Dan, is entirely respectable people are now clamoring, leading figures in the BBC and whatever are clamoring for things like GB News to be taken off air. They're openly professing censorship. Because, of course, the only way in which this extraordinary skewed, what's the word I want? I don't normally grope for words. I'm trying. As I said, it is like the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
What you actually have, you've got an official series of views, which everybody knows are false. Now, the only way that you can maintain the pretense that views that people don't believe in are views that people do believe in is by censorship, by actually overt censorship, or by censorship by social pressure. And I'm afraid that is exactly what we are seeing. And what makes it worse, Dan, right? Freedom of speech it can be just a bit of fun, the world that, to an extent, you and I live in and thrive in, because we've both got the gift of the gab. It's jolly good being gay, isn't it? It really does help. But it's something much more fundamental. The only genuine natural resource that these little islands have is freedom. The fact that we, a tiny country with a tiny population, were able to invent modernity and to reshape, conquer if you like, and reshape the world was because of freedom, because of that extraordinary fertility of ideas. This again is what Musk is talking about. And he is the reason that he is the richest man in the world. He's the most free-thinking man, often reckless, often stupid, often absurd. It doesn't matter. He also believes in something else, which we used to believe in too. He believes in that test by results. Again, the Bible, by their fruits ye shall know them. We now live in a world in which not only do we suppress language, why are they so keen on language? Why is the left so keen on language? It's so keen on language because it actually believes that uttering words by themselves make things different. I mean, we've just had a budget now, which is guaranteed to suppress growth. On the other hand, the Labour Party tells us its only principle is to make Britain the fastest growing economy in the G7. How is it going to do it? It's going to do it by magic. It's going to do it by uttering words. And this is, again, if you remember, in George Orwell's 1984, the last section of the book is a section on language. It's a section on newspeak, on words which are designed to control not simply what people say, but what they think and actually what they see. And you know what? It's very much like the Catholic Church, the medieval Catholic Church. Again, it's the belief in the magic of language. If I say hoc est corpus, the words of consecration of the Mass, and do you know what? And the bit of bread and the mug of and the chalice of wine actually become flesh and blood. Now we all know this is total nonsense, and I will even say it to my friend Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's complete nonsense, but it is that belief, and the medieval church enforced that belief by burning people alive. By burning people alive. We are now in a system where the left is trying through cancellation, and which, remember, if you're employed in the public sector, cancellation isn't what Dan and I went through. It is the destruction of your livelihood. In other words, it is by a genuine attempt at the destruction of an individual's livelihood, but also of their friends, of their status in society, and everything else. To do what? To perpetuate a lie. To perpetuate a society that is based on lies. The fundamental thing we've all got to learn to do is to tell the truth, is to use words so they correspond to real things. Let's all try and do it.
Indeed. Perfect note to stand by once more, David, because coming up in the uncancelled after show, much more from Mr Starkey on one of his specialist subjects, the monarchy. You know, it's very important to me that we have a safe space not patrolled by big tech, where censorship and control runs deep. So that's why we have www.outspoken.live, our membership section, where you get half an hour of extra content every single day via our Substack from today. So at this stage, we come off YouTube and Rumble, we move to Substack to continue our conversation. All you have to do is sign up at www.outspoken.live. But we are back live every weekday, 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on YouTube and Rumble. Please do hit subscribe. I promise to keep fighting for you, but I'll see you on the after show in just one moment with more from David Starkey.